Have you ever stood in an empty parking lot, clutching the keys to an old RV, watching the sunset, and suddenly wondered, did I trade a lifetime of busyness only to be left with a long road ahead? This is the story of a man who decided to sell his big house, downsize his belongings, and drive across states in an RV. At first, it was a choice for freedom. He wanted to feel the wind in Arizona's desert, see snow fall on Colorado mountains, cook dinner in a kitchen barely big enough for one. But one day, parked by Lake Michigan, he realized he had traveled far, not just in distance, but emotionally. The stillness of the lake no longer felt peaceful. It became a mirror reflecting his deepest question: what is he really searching for? Some people lose everything in life's storms, but some choose to let go and start over. What they don't talk about is the silent fear that follows. Fear that the choice was wrong. Fear of paying the price all over again. Fear that stopping might reveal what they've already lost for good. In today's video, we'll explore what really happens when a man decides to restart his life and how to make sure the next step forward doesn't turn into another price to pay. To understand this fear, let's go back to the moment he stepped away from his familiar home and onto the unknown road for the first time. Before he left, he worked in tech, lived in the suburbs of a big city. Each morning, he drove his pickup to the office, sipped coffee from a mug with his company's logo, and sat at a computer until night. His 2 children had moved out, leaving behind a spacious house filled with empty rooms. That emptiness began to creep in every evening when he opened the fridge and saw dinner was now just for one. On weekends, he'd sit on the porch, staring at the perfectly trimmed lawn, with no one left to play on it. He didn't lose his job, didn't get divorced, didn't go bankrupt. Everything was still there: money in the bank, a house, retirement savings, but something invisible was gone, a sense of purpose. And that void led to a bold decision: sell almost everything, keep only the most meaningful items, buy an old RV, and begin a journey without a map. The moment he drove out of his familiar neighborhood, it was early morning, sunlight streaming through the trees, reflecting on the windshield. He opened the window to feel the breeze and heard the GPS say, rerouting, as if his life was doing the same. At first, the freedom was sweet. That first night, he parked in a national park, opened the skylight, and stared at a star-filled sky he hadn't noticed in years. A simple dinner of bread, cheese, and a cold beer became his private feast. But as the first days passed, the initial thrill gave way to an odd silence. No more emails, no noisy TV, just the sound of wind whistling through the RV's cracks. One morning, parked by a lake, he sat in a folding chair with a cup of hot coffee, watching mist float above the water. In that moment, a question surfaced. What is he looking for? The loss wasn't the house or things, it was the invisible ties that had once anchored him. Leaving everything behind didn't just cut him off from work or routine, but also from casual chats with neighbors, the sound of a neighbor's dog, the familiar comfort of a corner coffee shop. He began to feel a different kind of loneliness, not alone in a quiet house, but alone beneath a wide sky and an open world. One rainy evening, he stopped in a small town, found a roadside bar. Inside, a few locals were chatting warmly. He sat at the counter, ordered a bourbon. The bartender, a middle-aged woman, asked where he was from. He shared a few stories. They laughed, talked for a while. When he returned to his RV, rain still tapping on the roof like a steady rhythm, he sat quietly. For the first time since leaving home, he felt like a guest in his own life. In the following weeks, he kept moving, met many people, a young couple also traveling across the US, a group of retired folks playing golf in Arizona, a veteran riding a motorcycle through the desert. These brief encounters warmed his heart, but also stirred something else, a fear of goodbye, a fear of leaving behind the rare moments of connection. His anger didn't explode, it simmered. He was mad at himself for not fully enjoying the freedom he chose, mad that instead of feeling liberated, he felt left behind. On some afternoons, he sat in his RV, watching rain streak down the windows, the weight of emotion pressing on him like a damp blanket. Next came guilt. He wondered if he was too hasty in selling his home. Could he buy back the things he gave away? Did his old neighbors still remember him? He even imagined returning to his old street, seeing someone else living in the house that was once his. The thought made his chest ache, so he began withdrawing. Instead of chatting with fellow travelers, He pulled the curtains, turned on dim lights, and wrote in his journal. Instead of visiting bars, he made quick dinners in the RV. Instead of posting his journey online, he put his phone on silent. None of this looked like failure, but it was a quiet retreat, as if he was building an invisible wall between himself and the world. One night, parked in the middle of the desert, staring at the distant lights of a town, he realized he left to escape emptiness, only to find a deeper, quieter void. His story isn't just a personal choice, it's a reflection of how the human mind reacts to big changes. When we cut off too much, even by choice, the brain treats it as a loss and goes into defense mode. His journey became a psychological experiment. When he let go of everything familiar, his brain activated an ancient response: protect safety at all costs. Scientists call it loss aversion, the human tendency to feel the pain of loss twice as intensely as the joy of gain. Even though he chose to leave, his mind and body still treated it like a loss that needed guarding against. In the brain, the amygdala, the fear center, lights up when facing possible loss. It's like a constant alarm saying, "Don't let this happen again." That's why, even while watching a Grand Canyon sunset or enjoying a cool Montana morning, part of him was on edge, waiting for something bad to happen. When fear rules the mind, behavior changes. Many men past 45 develop cautious instincts. They overthink decisions, miss chances, avoid opening up to strangers or trying new things, not out of weakness, but survival. But when caution becomes a wall, it traps them in permanent defense mode. In his case, the clearest sign was avoiding connection. Evenings that once felt lively at campsites became quiet nights behind drawn curtains. He still wrote in his journal, but the entries grew shorter, as if he didn't want to feel anymore. Video calls with his kids faded. He blamed bad signal. That's how fear takes over. It cuts off the very connections that might bring joy, just to avoid more hurt. Fear of repetition also distorts memory. When he recalled selling the house, he no longer saw the excitement of hitting the road, but only the exhaustion of packing, the echo of footsteps in empty rooms. Painful memories get amplified, while beautiful ones blur. He began believing he made the wrong choice, even though there had been meaningful moments. Neuroscience shows painful memories trigger cortisol, stress hormone, causing fast heartbeat and cold hands. That's why his stomach tightened when passing neighborhoods that looked like his old one. No one mentioned his past, but his body remembered. Living in this hyper-alert state creates a loop. More fear leads to more withdrawal, fewer positive experiences, more painful memories, shrinking life. Instead of expanding into new adventures, he stuck to old routines, only stopping at places he'd been before, as if the outside world posed danger. This fear didn't explode into panic, it crept in. It made him take the safest path in every situation. When an old friend invited him to fish in Alaska, he said he was too busy. When a stranger invited him to a BBQ, he smiled politely and returned to his RV. Emotional safety became the top priority, and slowly, the joy of freedom disappeared. This is how the brain works. It prioritizes survival over happiness. But if we don't notice, we end up living in an invisible box of our own making. Loneliness becomes a familiar space. And once you're used to loneliness, breaking out becomes even harder, because the mind fears that opening up again could lead to more pain. That's why so many middle-aged men in America look like they're enjoying freedom, but are actually trapped by invisible fear. They don't talk about it because they think they have to be strong. But silence becomes a burden, making their souls tired. Fear isn't the enemy, it's an evolved alarm system meant to protect us. The problem begins when it takes the wheel, turning us into drivers, circling the map without ever stopping somewhere new. Fear quietly steers us every day. But how do you know you're paying the price a second time, even without failing yet? There's something subtle that happens when fear becomes the invisible driver. You start paying before failure even occurs. The first sign is anxiety during peaceful moments. He shared that many mornings, he woke up in beautiful places, but instead of feeling joy, his mind spun with questions. Am I going the wrong way? His heart raced when a friendly neighbor knocked to offer coffee. Anxiety made him always ready to leave, never allowing himself to settle. The second sign is avoiding opportunities. When friends invited him to small events, a gathering, a hike, a travel group, he didn't reply. He made up valid reasons: needing rest, needing to drive, needing to work remotely. But truthfully, he feared connection might lead to commitment. He chose the safest path, avoid engagement to avoid potential pain, and so chances to build new memories passed, leaving bigger gaps. Another sign, self-sabotaging new relationships. Once, he met an older man at a campsite, had a great chat. The man invited him to fish the next morning. Instead of feeling excited, he felt anxious, like he was being tied down. That night, he packed up and left before sunrise, leaving only a short note. The next morning, seeing a photo of the man fishing alone, he felt a quiet sadness. That's when he realized he missed a real connection just because he feared one day he'd have to say goodbye. Others share similar stories. One man retired early, bought a beach house but avoided making friends, fearing one day he'd move. Another got a dog for companionship, but avoided dog parks to not talk to other owners. These behaviors don't hurt immediately but slowly erode joy. All these signs have one thing in common. They cost you the present. You say no to moments that could bring laughter, warmth, or memory. You let past pain dictate today's actions. And the irony is, the more you avoid, the more you believe the world is dangerous, continuing the loop. Recognizing these signs is the first key so you can pause before it's too late. When your heart races in a safe place, when you keep saying no to small invitations, when you miss a chance to connect and feel regret, that's when you ask, what am I avoiding? What am I afraid might repeat? So what can you do to break the loop? Let's move to the most important part, how to overcome fear.